Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Walton.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 19th, 2016. The Electoral College votes today in, 3 hours from now. So we have 3 hours to convince them to do something quickly about Donald Trump. Nothing will happen, of course, but I'm interested to see. We've all been discussing on the sidelines here how many, what should we call them? Hamilton electors? Depends, I don't know if they all consider themselves to be Hamilton electors. How many faithless electors? How many rogue electors? How many will we see? And from what direction will they be coming? Who will they cast their votes for? What have they conspired amongst themselves to do? I think ultimately the answer is not much. It's awfully difficult for the direction of the Electoral College to be changed. Would require some extraordinary circumstances. We do have those extraordinary circumstances, but not everyone sees them as extraordinary, as being as extraordinary as everyone else. And of course, the people who are most moved to see them as extraordinary will be Democrats, whose electoral votes, for the most part, will not count. Of course, the idea of reversing the outcome of the election with the Electoral College is pretty much out of the question. I mean, it can be done. We've mentioned it. I think from time to time, and I ultimately would, I think, take 38 of Donald Trump's Republican electors would have to decide not only that they don't want Donald Trump to be president, but that they do want Hillary Clinton to be president, and that's only counting if none of the Hillary Clinton electors either cast their vote for someone else or are involved in some sort of, some sort of plot to throw a third name in the hat in case the election were to go to the House of Representatives. It's extraordinarily difficult to coordinate the thinking in a short time on a super controversial subject among 538 very disparate, different types of people there for different reasons, who got there in different ways, and who are in 50 different states, and who will meet in 50 different states. There's no opportunity to get together on the floor of the Electoral College and talk to one another. They all vote in their respective states. If you, by the way, are nearby the capital of your respective state, that's where the action will be, 12 noon Eastern Time. You won't be able, I don't think you can, what do they do in Hawaii? Are they just up at 6 in the morning or whatever doing their voting? It shouldn't matter, but I guess they want everybody to do it all at the same time. That's a good question. I'm so Eastern focused. Obviously I can imagine easily enough that at 9 in the morning, it's not hard for Californians to do their electoral voting at 9 in the morning, but I don't even know what the Hawaii time zone is, which is a huge insult to everybody in Hawaii. Maybe Greg knows. We'll look it up. Coordinating the activity, not likely to happen. More likely than not, you'll get a smattering of votes of conscience among a few Republican, maybe one Republican elector, and I don't know, half a dozen either protest votes or somehow strategic votes, perhaps among Democratic electors. I don't expect there to be very much in the way of change. If there was, it would be great. I think it would be a fantastic opportunity. Republicans who are mainline establishment Republicans, and these are all largely party functionaries who become electors. It's a matter of the party appointing you to the job, and it's a nice reward. People think it's kind of a cool job and never really changes anything, so they give the slot out to people who have done terrific and outstanding work for their parties. So the Republican electors are going to be mainline Republicans, some more conservative than others, some concerned about Donald Trump, some not. But it would be a great opportunity for them to say, hey, you know what? Let's throw it to the House. The outcome isn't going to change. Regular, mainline, to be read, weirdo, Republicans in the House will do the voting. They'll elect Donald Trump. I won't have betrayed my party. And at worst, it's an opportunity for the party to claim some ownership for having installed Donald Trump and sort of reminding him, yeah, you know, you don't win the presidency as an independent, as popular as you think you are. You had to ride the Republican Party machinery to get there, and you probably shouldn't forget it, because you're going to try and pretend you're super independent and don't have to listen to us, because it's all been about pushback on the establishment. But we're still here. We still run this show. We still control Congress, and we still make or break our own candidates. And I don't know. I think if they would have thought about reminding him of that a couple days ago, I believe they might have engineered something to do that. But who they would choose among the electors to cast those votes, I'm not sure. And since you can't coordinate it among the states, it'd be awfully difficult to get the job done, which is why I think you will find that today at noon, the same guy is going to be president that you thought was going to be president before, even if it pissed you off. Anyway, that update out of the way, we can turn to the headlines and welcome Greg back to the show. It's been a while. Hi, Greg.
Hey, so, I knew this was going to be an interesting show because this is a process question. And so, whenever there's process questions, I spend most of my time asking you stuff. Right?
All right.
But as I understand it, the politics of this is a little bit different. That is to say, I heard John Podesta say, he really hasn't won until he's won, and there's a possibility that 37 will defect, and therefore yada yada. That's
Podesta,
not because anybody really thinks that Trump won't get the number. The point of that is the same point of pointing out the Russian meddling and the Comey intervention. Nice piece from Kevin Drum on that I'll get to.
Okay.
The whole idea is every question that you bring up about doubt, about how outcomes come, decreases Trump's claiming a mandate. And that's what this is all about, not reversing the win. It's that, here's a good piece, for example, there's a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll out. The good news for Donald Trump, this is from First Read. The good news for Donald Trump, a month after his presidential victory, 50% of Americans approve of the way he's handling his transition and preparations for becoming president, 41% disapprove. That's a just out yesterday poll. That's a higher approval favorable number than he ever received during the campaign. But here's the bad news. Trump's 50-41 score significantly trails Obama's 71-14 or Bill Clinton's 73-13. In other words, it's a historic low. They didn't poll George W. Bush because there was this Florida recount going on, so it missed that poll. They're trying to compare same time of year, same time of term. That is to say, you're president-elect. What do you think? So they go on to say this honeymoon phase is as good as it gets for a president in waiting, and President-elect Donald Trump is facing a divided country. What's more, as the Electoral College meets today, more on that below, Trump's 306 versus 232 electoral votes ranks 46th out of 58 elections, and him losing the popular vote by 2.1 percentage points. Clinton essentially is tied what Obama got in 2012 in terms of popular vote. Is 47th out of the last 49 elections, per the New York Times, which means a shorter initial leash with the American public, they say. And that's my point about challenging even one or two electors.
Yeah.
Republicans now control the White House, Senate, and House. First time they'll hold all three seats since the Bush years, and they will use that power to make sweeping policy changes. The same NBC Wall Street Journal poll finds 68% of Americans believing that Trump's presidency will change the way things are done in government. But Trump and the GOP also have a shorter initial leash, at least in terms of popular opinion, than any other victorious party in modern times, according to the polls. And so what you have is everybody challenging everything about the Trump transition and candidacy. He's got record low numbers because of that. From a Democratic or progressive point of view, that's a good thing, because the less he can claim a mandate, the less stuff actually gets done. The other side of the coin, from the process point of view, you talked about the electors being party apparatchiks and functionaries. The reason that the vote is a foregone conclusion, I think, is because, again, politics, not policy or process here, those same functionaries are very vulnerable to threats. And there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on them to toe the line. And so I can't see very many of them breaking. On the other hand, Democrats are Democrats. We don't belong to an organized party. We're Democrats, said Will Rogers, and it's still true. So you got the Washington state electors threatening to vote for somebody else. These are Bernie people. And if that happens, it dilutes a little bit the idea that, the country said no. Well, actually, it may turn out that you have more Democrat electors not being faithless than Republicans. It could turn out that way.
It definitely could, and it's the reason you would want perhaps more coordination among them, but you don't have it, so it's a guessing game.
But Republicans are much better at beating their people into line than Democrats are.
Yes, typically.
So that's what happens. As far as did I missed the first part of your entry there?
Me too.
They don't have to be there personally? I thought everybody has to gather in the House chamber with Joe Biden presiding between 12 and 1 or something like that.
No, the electors vote in their separate states, in the state capitals of their states, and they send the ballots. The ballots are counted in the House chamber on the 6th, I think. So the scene that you saw with Al Gore, that's just members of the House and Senate gathering in joint session to count the votes. The electors stay home. They're done today. They vote in their home states.
Well, wasn't the whole point of doing this now giving them a chance to get to Washington by horse and buggy?
No. It was the point of doing this now was to get their votes posted and transported. But originally, of course, it wasn't done at this time of year either. But I don't really know why we have to have the same amount of delay. There's no reason to wait from December 19th to January 6th to open and count the votes. But electors don't go to D.C. They sit, they're meeting in their state capitals. And so the electors from New Jersey never meet or talk to the electors from California or Hawaii or anybody.
Is it at least teleskyped so that you can see who they are? I want to see how many of them have bags over their heads with the eyes cut out sideways. Remember?
Very often you can, I don't know. There's 50 of them. I think C-SPAN might show some of them.
Of course, C-SPAN. Who else would?
But, otherwise, I imagine, local television networks will likely maybe
chase
send a
after,
camera.
Missing white women is what they like to do. We're looking at C-SPAN if anybody's going to carry it.
Yeah,
or maybe
that's all there is. Your
C-SPAN.
Local news possibly could have a clip to, if they spend any time on it. And I don't even think, generally speaking, your evening news is going to stop to say, so the Electoral College voted today. They might say it, but I don't know. So maybe
I just
few
want
seconds
some guy with
sound.
a paper bag on his head to say, I'm the unknown elector. I'm from this state, and I am voting for Insult the Comic Dog or somebody.
I went to the last Electoral College vote in Virginia to witness it in December of 2012, and it was drove down to the state capitol and went into the Senate chamber. And observed at the invitation of one of the electors, who's a Daily Kos user and a Twitter user as well. You'll find him. What's his Twitter handle? Paradox13VA. It's let me just make sure I have it offhand correct. Yeah, Evan Macbeth at Paradox13VA was a Democratic elector for Barack Obama in Virginia last time around, and he knows my love of process, and he said, hey, you want to come and see it? So I went and I've witnessed it. It was great. We won that one. So that was good.
They're more fun to watch.
Yeah, but right, they're gathering in their states. The scene that you have in your head, either from C-SPAN or Fahrenheit 9/11 or wherever you may have seen the fight about electoral votes, is them in Washington counting it a couple weeks later.
Yeah. Okay, so more from that NBC Wall Street Journal poll. 55% are concerned about Russia's interference in the election. More than half Americans say they are significantly bothered by the news that hackers working in connection with a foreign government were involved in trying to influence November's presidential election, according to this Wall Street Journal poll. In the survey, 43% of respondents said they're bothered a great deal and 12% quite a bit. By contrast, 23% of Americans say they aren't bothered at all. Those are Trump supporters. 8% said very little, and another 10% said, what day is it?
Right.
But there's a notable partisan divide. Yeah, noble partisan divide on the question. 86% of Democrats are bothered, great deal. 29% Republicans who say this, and 49% independents. So half the independents are not keen about this. More than three-quarters of the Democrats are, and a quarter of Republicans. So three-quarters of Republicans say, yeah, it's bad, but our guy won because of it, so F you, because minority rule is over the majority is really what we care about. And in other words, Republicanization of politics is essentially the House winning over the Senate in regard to how the public processes this. Mm-hmm. They're really, really interested in having minority rule. They don't really care about anybody else. And that's interesting, and it's a little disappointing, but it's part of, not all the country feels that way, and that's why Trump starts out with no mandate. And separately, only 37% believe Russia's actions helped Trump win the election. That's not the point. This isn't why Trump won, although maybe with WikiLeaks it is, maybe WikiLeaks plus Comey together it is, maybe Comey alone it is, when you have a very close election with 70,000 votes separating the two, despite a 2% win for Clinton. Everything mattered. The point is to have the American public understand, which they mostly do, except along partisan lines, and even there I think people are lying to the polls. They just feel good about it because it helped their side win. People understand this isn't a good thing, and people understand that it is something to be investigated. So there will be some investigations. We'll see how that goes. The point, again, is not to reverse the election. The point is raise questions about Trump's mandate, and I think it's all good.
Yes. Well, that's definitely a large part of it, and it would be a huge asterisk, obviously, if there were anything weird to happen in the Electoral College. Even a few rogue electors, and there are rogue electors not almost every time, but it's
why are they rogue and not faithless?
Because the movie is out.
Oh, okay.
If it was Faithless One, you'd hear more about faithless electors.
Yeah,
I guess. But it does happen from time to time. We just ignore it. But this time, there'll be Trivial Pursuit answers for a while, even if there's only 5 of them.
Mm. As far as the Jim Comey stuff. And more on the FBI in general. This isn't even Comey. This is FBI investigating WikiLeaks. John Podesta says the FBI contacted him only once, 2 days after the WikiLeaks released his emails.
Okay.
So he's claiming that the FBI really wasn't that involved with it, and they were spending time doing other things. Obviously, they were spending way more time looking at Clinton's emails than they were looking at this.
Yeah, not terribly surprising. I guess it's surprising that they asked at all.
So here's Mother Jones, Kevin Drum, saying, why are Democrats so damn timid about James Comey and the FBI?
Damn it.
And he points out John Podesta, not happy about all of this. I'm surprised that Democrats have been so muted about the FBI's role in the election. If something like this had happened to Republicans, it would have been flogged daily on Rush, Drudge, Fox News, Breitbart, and Wall Street Journal, and Facebook pages of everyone from Sarah Palin and Alex Jones. But Democrats have been almost pathologically afraid to talk about it, apparently cowed by the possibility that Republicans will mock them for making excuses about their election loss. And that's crazy. And then he has a quick review of why it was such a big deal. Any one of these things, including the 11-day announcement by Comey that screwed everything, any one of these things could have been an accident. Put them all together, you need to be pretty obtuse not to see the partisan pattern in every single case. Comey and the FBI did what was best for Republicans and worst for Democrats in every single case. If you want to believe it's just a coincidence, go ahead. But nobody with a room temperature IQ credits that. The FBI has spent the entire past year doing everything it could to favor one party over the other. Democrats ought to be in a seething fury about this. Instead, they're arguing about a few thousand white rural voters in Wisconsin and whether Hillary Clinton should have visited Michigan more times in October. So I'm seething about it still. However, I think the part that Kevin Drum misses in this piece is, what are you going to do about it?
Oh, right. Well,
part of the time to get upset in seething fury is when there's an action that you can take to reverse this. And in this particular case, there isn't. You can't change the election. You can't even change the head of the FBI if that were possible, because then with Trump there, you get Comey out and Giuliani in. So Comey's position is pretty safe.
Yeah.
And if you can't do anything about it, then why spend all your time and effort railing about it?
I'll get an answer. Well, I don't.
Not that we're not upset about it, but that's why.
Yeah, well, that's obviously going to be one reason. And a good reminder, once again, I did see somebody writing on it recently, and I was reminded, Meteor Blades has written on this for about 10 to 15 years, and probably longer, since before we knew him. This is kind of the wages of doing dumb stuff like handing over military affairs or national security affairs to Republicans when Democrats win the White House. That was a huge plague
when you
for
have
a
an
long
asymmetric
time.
situation that Norm Ornstein has pointed out so often, and you say, look, if I just do this for cooperation, it would be a good thing. We'll put a Republican as Secretary of Defense. It never works out. It just never works out.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And you should be able to tell that right from the start, even if you don't fully understand the asymmetry of it. Just thinking through the idea of, well, they'll respect us more if we choose one of them for that area that they believe they have expertise in, and we don't. And it's like it's 2 seconds thought.
What they're really doing is
no.
they're playing to a
know.
mythical center that isn't there.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
I mean, remember,
just
people who come across as moderate aren't moderates at all. They think radical things about Social Security on the one hand, making them lefty, and maybe they want a single payer, but they also want to bomb the hell out of Iran right now, making them very, very hawkish. And when you combine those 2 points of views, you're right in the center. Now, if those are the people that you're trying to persuade with a Republican hawk at defense, because there aren't any others that are going to get confirmed, you've already lost.
I guess so. Yeah, I was just thinking about the partisan contest of it as between Republicans and Democrats in Washington. The idea of saying, if I capitulate, they'll respect me. Like you're talking with people who disrespect capitulation more than anything.
Yeah,
how do you
ask Pat
think that's going
McCrory
to
how
work?
that works.
Yeah. So, well, whatever. It's not that wasn't never likely to work, and we're stuck with part of the results. We finally got to the place where, for a while anyway, we were at least nominating Democrats to military, to oversee the military and the various roles of secretaries of defense, army, the various branches. We weren't getting fantastic Democrats, and they were still militaristic Democrats, to be sure, but I don't know. Somewhere along the line, for some reason, they thought James Comey, FBI, and he's not. He wasn't the worst.
He stood up to Ashcroft,
Yeah,
and
he wasn't the worst when he was.
I mean,
in a functionary
he's
position,
got limits
but
perhaps that a Trumpian supporter doesn't have. And if that's the best thing you can say about him, that's all we got right now, and that's why he's not going to get replaced. But this whole idea, even in Congress, of playing to the centrists, there aren't any. There aren't any. And so it's a losing game because you're playing to a constituency that doesn't exist, and they're playing to a constituency that does.
Yeah. Well, yes. Rats. Hey,
Rats.
That's
Doesn't
terrible.
Work. All right, what are we left with? David Frum here,
Okay.
who is a senior editor at The Atlantic, goes where psychiatrists fear to tread. David Frum on the consequences of Donald Trump's narcissism. This is a Storify I did. Trump is a textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder. He can say that because he's not a doctor. Doctors feel ethically obliged not to say that unless they've examined him. Trump, a textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder. And I should point out, Dana Hole, our friend, has pointed this out way many times before this, but this was from the weekend. Will believe the lies he tells them after he tells them.
Oh, yeah,
Meaning that Trump will live among ego-salving fantasies, a dangerous location for a president of the United States. This is a short one. Worse, Trump will surround himself by people who repeat his lies back to him, either abject creatives or sinister manipulators. Worse still, because the conservative media amplify Trump's lies, the whole conservative world will lose touch with reality, encouraging true believers to act en masse as if the lies were truth. Lock her up. Among other negative consequences, this will encourage reckless political risk-taking by Republicans in Congress, and it remains true. Remember, Frum's a Republican, or was, that Republican candidates for president have won the national popular vote only once since 1988, 1 in 7 elections. The party's agenda is not popular in real life. That would seem to suggest caution. Instead, it seems congressional Republicans are about to plunge ahead as if the country were clamoring for their program. Some congressional Republicans surely know this not to be true, but they dare not act on that knowledge. In 65, 81, and 2009, new presidents changed national direction with clear Democratic consent, small d. 2017 bids to be as activist as those prior years without the clear consent. How will that end? Not well, I fear. By the way, if you haven't familiarized yourself with the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder, you should. And he sent you to the Mayo Clinic so you can look it up.
Okay. Well, all right. I mean, he makes some sense. He makes some good points. As usually you have to supplement David Frum with, there should have been a 13th tweet that says, I know this because I did it at the behest of the last Republican administration.
Right. I have experience with this.
But yeah, that, and of course, by the way, another great, if you haven't familiarized yourself with the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder, I have a 24-part tweet storm that will explain it to you. Please pay attention.
Exactly. Or you could look it up in your local DSM.
Yes.
Which is the psychiatric version of all of this. But, he's certainly got a great point there. And yes, you're absolutely right. Frum is no flaming liberal. In fact, he was part of claiming the mandate. Mm-hmm. He's part of that crew. And that's why it's always interesting to hear people like Matthew Dowd or even Karl Rove with criticisms about how, Trump is doing X or Y when in fact that's not really what's going on. You guys invented the whole idea of doing things that weren't true and then claiming they were. So yeah, you would know. And if you're disappointed now, you're part of the problem. But I do appreciate your insight into the problem there.
Well, it's like hearing
you would know better than anybody.
We hear from Karl Rove now about how outrageous this is, and it was
for example,
the whole thing, the whole we invent our own reality stuff.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
That was him.
We did that.
Yeah. So okay, it's a good point, and I'll cleave to it where we can, but it is a little frustrating. But okay, I'm glad he's saying it.
Brings up the whole idea of pointing out, no, this isn't a mandate.
Yeah.
I mean, even from that perspective, to admit that it's not a mandate is important because, as NBC First Read pointed out in that segment that we did, if in fact that's the case and that's how the country views it, then support that point of view. And if that support happens to come from the likes of David Frum or Matthew Dowd, fine. It's true. It has, as we like to say in the business, it has the advantage of being true.
Yes, that is true. So I'm stuck with that word. Even Joe Walsh went nuts over the weekend.
Any port in a storm.
Yeah, I guess so. I forget by now but it was Saturday. He was raging and furious about Trump in general, and he's upset about Republicans not being infuriated.
It's
by
about the Russian influence and claiming that was his thing that he was railing about.
Yeah,
that they refused to accept that Russians meddled, and that they refused to accept the intelligence, and that they refused to accept the fact that a foreign country has meddled in national sovereignty. That's a big thing to him, and a lot of conservatives, Evan McMullen among them. So that's what he was railing about.
And okay, he's right.
He's right.
Now,
he's still Joe Walsh.
Wrong
at the end of the day, David Frum is still David Frum. But they're right about this.
Yes. So we pointed out.
Anyway, my segment for today, I just thought that putting the whole point of view of what people are talking about and why it is not to reverse the election. Don't worry about people mocking you because you say you're going to reverse the election. Trump won, but... And the but is he has no mandate from the public. And if he claims one, the protests start. Yeah.
Well, they've already begun. And don't worry about it even if you want to reverse the election. It just doesn't matter. They're going to make fun of you anyway. So
yeah, that's okay. But today's the day to do it.
Yeah. I mean, all right. It's likely not going to happen, but I think everybody knows that. But hey, if someone crazy and it did... we'd have a hell of a fight on our hands, but...
but why, thank you for explaining the process. Why would you stay in Hawaii in the middle of December when you can come to D.C.?
I don't know, especially if you could have horrible jet lag on top of it.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. Well, everybody gets to stay in their own states. The only thing I haven't figured out yet is, well, first of all, what time is it in Hawaii? It's 4 hours earlier in... How many hours earlier is it?
Yeah, if it's 4 hours earlier in Hawaii, and today is Monday, who's the conductor of that train?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's... I never have looked it up because I've literally not even ever been close to Hawaii, unfortunately. So,
well, we have some very loyal Hawaiian listeners, so at the very least...
well, in the afternoon they'll tell us.
The time differences.
Right. I can't imagine them having... Well, still, how early could it be? I mean, if you had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to cast an electoral vote once every 4 years, you'd probably be able to manage that.
Yeah, I would think.
Traffic in Honolulu is probably not even bad.
That would be funny, though, that Trump didn't get as many electors as he thought because the West Coast and beyond decided to oversleep. Yeah. It's not that they had a protest post. They just didn't set the alarm.
Yeah, well, at a certain point as the hours roll westward, he runs out of electoral votes.
Well, at the same time, it would be fairly typical of the Trump administration, right? It wasn't an organized protest. They just didn't get around to it.
Right. That could be it. Or they sent it the wrong date.
Yeah.
Show up on November.
The idea that you have, and again, this has been pointed out by many, but whether you're talking about the chief of staff,
Prius, yes,
or whether you're talking about a lot of the cabinet people, you have a bunch of folks there who have zero experience in doing this.
Yes.
And does it matter? Well, we're about to find out, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Reince Priebus, we made it in the news. I saw this morning he was flexing his muscles in Trump Tower. So
whatever that means. Yeah, I saw somebody asked the question over on Daily Kos when I did the Pund Roundup this morning. Does Trump have to use government physicians, or can he use his own? Does that guy with the one who wrote the letter for him get to be his personal physician? And the answer is sure if he wants. But the funny thing is, I originally, being so early in the morning, misread it as physicist.
Oh.
But it's the same answer. He doesn't have to use government physicists. He can have his own. He can still have that guy, same guy,
Yes.
Who wrote the, he's got perfect health letter. He could be the physicist.
Sure, why not? He could be the
vice president. Go over and negotiate with Iran about the energy policy, because that's what the Department of Energy does. It doesn't just look for oil, Rick Perry.
Right. It doesn't hardly do that at all, as a matter of fact.
As a matter of fact. And I saw lots of experienced political people who I like and therefore will not name names saying the fact that Rick Perry was governor of a state that has a lot of oil should quiet a lot of the critics about him being head of the Department of Energy. Well, that's not what the Department of Energy does.
Saturday Night Live had the better explanation for his appointment, which was Alec Baldwin's Trump character saying, I saw that guy on Dancing with the Stars. He had so much energy. So that couldn't be it.
I find myself not being able to watch Saturday Night Live and a whole bunch of other stuff after the elections. I don't find a whole lot funny about this.
Oh, me neither. Extremely serious.
I'm just saying. That's me.
I'm changing my mind after you hang up.
You're changing your number after you hang up. Well, thanks so much for having me on. In any case, this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. It's Monday, and we have a whole week of shows.
Yes, something.
Except for me on Friday, because I got more meetings.
Yeah.
Things are changing at work. They're having a lot more meetings. So from the show's perspective, I'm going to have a lot of trouble doing Fridays.
Fascism has already begun.
Short term. That'll change. But I just thought I'd let you know.
All right, then. I'll just say it quickly. Fascism. And then it'll be over quickly. Has begun.
I can't come to this meeting because of fascism. That's going to go over really well.
Try it. And they'll get sensitive about it and change their minds.
They do. You're taking it the wrong way, guys.
Yeah. All right.
All righty. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Right. Thanks very much, Greg. Good start here for our fascism. As fascism goes, we're doing fantastically this Monday. Friday is already a question mark, as it will be it's one of those day before a holiday break begins kind of things. The kids are out of school. I'll definitely be traveling at some point on Friday, but maybe not until after the show is traditionally finished. But the place will be a madhouse trying to get everything organized. It sounds like a better day for a pre-recorded show. Monday we'll be traveling back, so I will try and have at least one new content show available for the bookends of the holiday weekend so that we're not stuck without something new for 4 days. At most, it will be 3 if I can get shows together. I mean, we certainly have enough material. The question is finding time to record it and edit it together, since, of course, I have lots of last-minute errands to do even before the kids stay home on Thursday. But we'll try and get it together and fix the things up for you, for entertaining you. If you need the entertainment, you may be very busy yourself from Friday through Monday, but I would assume that maybe by Monday people would want to be back and grounded again. All right, so let's see. Morning's news. We've got certainly hit all the headlines, lots of new discussion going on. I guess we're kind of done with the Electoral College thing in that, I mean, I think we all kind of know where that's going, and we've been over the theory and we understand something about the process of it. I threw out there this morning, as I said, this is we discussed it at the end of last week also, the idea of if you can't get, and I don't think there's anybody really betting that you can get 38 electors who are committed, normally would be committed to voting for Donald Trump, to say, yeah, Hillary Clinton. I mean, they were out there chanting lock her up. Not likely the electors necessarily, but maybe at least a few of them probably were doing that. And by the way, and I say that they're party functionaries, that's an extraordinarily broad brush for all of them. And some of them are very high-ranking types of party functionaries. For instance, and when I say high-ranking, it's not members of Congress. It can't be members of Congress, as a matter of fact. That's one of the few restrictions about who can serve in the Electoral College, and otherwise, that's exactly likely who you would see. People who have significant political machines of their own at their disposal, but they're not allowed to be in it. The way it goes, though, is state party functionaries, state party chairs, and they don't hog it all to themselves either. It's a nice way to give out a nice perk to people who have been exceptionally helpful in building the party locally or on the state level or even nationally. So, for instance, I mentioned to you that I got invited to watch the 2012 Electoral College voting here in Virginia because I was invited by Evan McBeth, who was at the time had he just wrapped up? I can't even remember exactly where his term ended, but he was the my local county committee person, state chair, or rather county chair for the Democratic Party, and as a result was also active in the state party. Would he have been on the executive committee? But he was certainly a player of sorts in the state party organization, and an up-and-comer and interested in the procedure and process, and said, hey, that'd be something I'd like to do. And he was a known quantity to the state party leadership, and they said, I would love to be able to allow you to do that, and there's a couple of slots, and give it to some people who have done some good work and gotten some notice. In California, of course, they have considerably more slots. So many of you who have had this discussion online, or particularly on Twitter, about the Electoral College and what it does and what it can and can't do, may have run into the fact that Christina Pelosi is an elector there, not her mom. That wouldn't be permissible. But, of course, she's got a pretty decent connection, yes, to both the state and national Democratic parties, and so you find yourself in that seat. And many of them, though, considerably more, come from, the ranks of where Evan came from. He's not not the top Democrat in the state, and I'm sure he'd tell you far from it, but, involved, up and coming, talking to people, running for office every once in a while, right? That's the kind of person who typically gets it, of late anyway. And that's at least partly a function of the fact that it's kind of a rubber stamp. There's very little doubt in handing the job to people who are party stalwarts. What are they going to do when it comes time to cast the vote? It's only in doubt at all, or people only entertain doubts at all, because Donald Trump, well, he is who he is, for one thing, and he's an oddball kind of a guy, and he's not, your typical Republican, and so therefore you will find that mainstream establishment Republicans, having run so hard against the establishment, aren't exactly thrilled to death with the guy, even though he won in their name. So there's an opening there, but also, if it were, I don't know. I'm certain that, back in the day, back closer to the establishment of the Electoral College. And by the way, you should not ignore in all this. It doesn't really factor into my thinking about what they're going to do, but it factors into a lot of other people's thinking. A lot of good current writing out there, about the nature of the Electoral College, or the decision to rely on the Electoral College, and that comes to the conclusion that, well, it's kind of a racist institution, and it was put in place. It didn't get played that way, of course, in the original writing. You don't say, what I think. Hamilton sits down and says, the good thing about this is it's going to be racist, and that's fantastic. So you're not going to find anything quite like that. But they couch things in terms of course, we need to be able to make sure that some sort of popular tyrant doesn't take over. And there were founders of who were the sort of people who, when they thought about popular tyrants rising up and winning a popular victory among the masses, well, they were contemplating, perhaps, even though they had just, framed a constitution counting enslaved African Americans, or they didn't even bother calling them Americans, enslaved Africans, period, as 3/5 of a person. Well, it's not much of a leap, of course, to just think about excluding them forever. But there were certainly people who contemplated their eventual emancipation and probably inclusion among the citizenry. There were some advanced thinkers even then. They didn't carry the day, and they probably didn't even speak about it a whole lot, because they knew that they might, in fact, lose their seat at a very important table back then. So there was some respectability politics going on among forward-thinking people that we might think of as progressives for their time, but who probably contemplated the eventual emancipation and granting of citizenship for former slaves and their descendants, who might still, though they thought that was a good idea, worry, well, what if they really were granted the franchise? In some southern states, they would outnumber the former slave-owning white population considerably, and who knows what the outcome of that would be. And as much as I'd like to see them emancipated, I'm sure there were thinkers back then who thought, I don't know that they're ready to be handed the task of electing a president. Why? Because they were still racist, despite the fact that they were forward-thinking, and it took America quite a long time to come around to even the position we occupy today, which is by no means fantastic, and we got a lot of problems, and I'll let other people hang the labels on them, but I think you know which labels I'm talking about. Now I'm out of my depth when it comes to the current situation and commenting on where to find the racism of today and how deep it truly runs. I can toe the popular line easily enough, but yeah, when it comes to recounting personal experience and going a little bit deeper, I don't have the same experience. I rely on others to tell me what their experiences have been and say, I could see that, and that's as far as I am willing to go with it. Okay, so let's turn around and head back in the other direction. So, like I said, lots of discussion about what they could be doing in the Electoral College. Who's really there, though, I think is important to point out. They're not national figures typically. They're not even necessarily the top ranks exclusively of a state party, but they certainly, state party top ranks are well represented there. And that's another thing, too. There's the possibility of political consequences, retribution, for people who might be contemplating going rogue. But I will point this out. There's still a lot of room for it. While it's true that someone who may be sitting in their state's electoral college by virtue of being the state party chairperson, vice chairperson, former chairperson, up-and-coming possible chairperson, state legislators, what have you, who are in a position to worry about that kind of retribution. There are also people who have perhaps been in the party for many years and are about to retire from active participation in it, or retire from their jobs and maybe take a smaller role in these things, or people who would say, you know, I've enjoyed my rise through the ranks. I've been involved in the party for 10, 12 years, but it really wouldn't be a bad trade for me to say, you know what, I've come to the end of my rope with this party. And if they were going to, you know, if it was the same party I felt I joined a dozen years ago, I might feel differently about it, but I am instead extraordinarily worried about what's going on, and I would really like to make a protest that gets heard. And if it's the last thing I ever do as a Republican or Democrat, as the case may be, so be it. There are going to be a handful in each state who are in a position of saying, I just don't care that much. Now, I guess if you are the kind of person who believes that Donald Trump is such a menace to the country, and there are many who do, that I might find myself in Guantanamo or some sort of FEMA re-education camp if I do that. Well, one, I would say you have a particular responsibility not to go ahead and rubber stamp this, but I imagine I can understand why you might be afraid to do so, but I think there are probably fewer people in that basket, to revive that horrible term, than you might expect. I don't know how many people are really worried about really worried about finding themselves in a re-education camp. I think the numbers are probably fewer there. But certainly there are people who worry about retribution, and others who say, you know, there's probably just a few less than that who say, there's really not a whole hell of a lot that I care about the party apparatus doing to me at this stage. More of them will care than won't. But there will be a few. So, I don't know. We don't have to wait too long to find out. I can't recall, because, again, it's just never been such an issue, whether it's not a secret. The electoral votes in the state, in the procedures that go on in the state capitals, they get counted and announced. So it's not like they have to wait. The formal counting on the House floor in January is typically a foregone conclusion because all of the results have been announced. And I imagine if there's any state that gets an anomalous result, even, and this time people will be interested in it, even if it's only one rogue elector of one kind or another, that'll get some mention, at least in print, if not in your local evening broadcast news. So we'll have a good idea of what the count is by tonight, and so it'll make the newspapers tomorrow morning or online tonight. So no surprises then when they get together in Washington in early January. Again, no surprises. They'll open the very same ballots they counted today and count them again for posterity's sake. The only change that can happen between now and then is And I really recommend this. So Virginia electors, if you're listening, send the electoral votes in one of those fake peanut brittle cans with the spring-loaded snakes in them. I think that would be fantastic because I would love to see that on C-SPAN in January. And now opening, here are the electoral votes from Virginia. Boing! They sent, oh, isn't that sweet? They sent us delicious peanut brittle from Virginia, which produces a lot of peanuts, by the way. The great state, or as they should say, if they're smart, Commonwealth of Virginia. And let's enjoy the peanuts. And then boing, that'd be terrific. That'd be well worth watching. Also well worth watching, but I did not get satisfaction on this front this weekend, but there's more football to come. I'm still waiting for an NFL quarterback to incorporate no puppet into a snap count. I think that's worth money. We should start a Kickstarter for that. And we'll pay on the side. If you would just, instead of like Omaha, no puppet, I think that would be great. Everyone would love it. So, this morning's conversation on Twitter has largely been not about the Electoral College, although I've had a lot to say about it, but rather about Donald Trump having invited members of the press, as we used to say, but I guess now we say media, to Mar-a-Lago for ostensibly a Christmas celebration, off the record. I guess that's what's got people up in arms. The idea of bringing the press in and having an off-the-record discussion. He did allow some pictures to be taken. Those are being circulated on Twitter. And so I don't know whether that was a great idea. It was a great idea for Trump. I don't know whether it was a great idea for members of the press, because all that happens is they get photographed, and now Trump supporters say, these are the reporters who are susceptible to being kept under Trump's thumb, and that'll be up to us to pressure them to stay there. And everybody else said, these are the people who have capitulated to Trump in his ridiculous terms on which he conducts relations with the press and everybody else, and we're going to hate these people forever. And now we have a photograph of them. Brilliant for Trump to photograph that and put that out there on the record. It was a great trap. Nothing out of the ordinary, really, about a president or president-elect inviting members of the press to a casual, off-the-record, holiday-type gathering. It happens all the time. Of course, we remember when John McCain did it, and he did barbecues at his, what would you call it, estate in Arizona. Is it a compound? Does it qualify as a compound? I'm not really sure. But that, and of course, White House Christmas parties, and you get to go, and it's off the record for the most part in terms of talking to the president. You get to build a little bit of a personal relationship. Under ordinary circumstances, it happens. There's nothing terribly wrong with it. There's usually some protest about it, but not very much. I think, generally speaking, there's room for professional members of the press to have a professional relationship, but also have some personal understanding with the people that they're covering. Though Donald Trump, as usual, presents a pretty unique case. And this time, I think some of the criticism is warranted. The idea of having such an off-the-record holiday gathering by itself is not unusual. What is unusual is the circumstances under which he's holding it. He has not had a press conference in a million years, and members of the press have ostensibly been grousing about that, and now they're being granted access again, but only if it's off the record. So that should probably upset them to some extent. And more to the point, of course, is accepting an invitation like that after Trump spent the entirety of his campaign literally demonizing individual members of the press. And I don't know whether any of the people he individually demonized, by name at his rallies actually showed up at this event. That I don't think is the case. And I don't think that he would have invited them either. I don't think he's quite that cynical. I think he's wearing his heart on his sleeve when it comes to reporters that he hates. He continues to hate them and would exclude them from such an event for that reason, because I hate you and I want you to know that. But I'm not positive about that. I haven't cross-checked the photo. Generally speaking, your basic establishment media types, not, and I don't consider myself a serious studied media critic. There's things that piss me off, and that's about it. And I take other people's word for who sucks in the press. Occasionally, I can identify people on my own, but not necessarily my real beat. So, okay. At any rate, it's been interesting watching people respond to it. I think the name I've seen most criticized, I guess, is Mike Allen's, because, and I think it happened because Mike Allen, I think, is the one who circulated the picture of the group with Donald Trump in his stupid thumbs up pose from Mar-a-Lago. I don't know if he took the picture, if he's in the picture. I don't think I would recognize Mike Allen. But he's the kind of name that comes up as your basic establishment kind of dude. And he lives up to the reputation there. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of mention that because everybody's talking about it. I don't know exactly what else to think about that other than the kind of event is not unusual. It's just the circumstances under which the event is held. He's been so horrible to the press. I would worry, frankly, if I were among the members of the press who got an invitation to something like that. That would make me suspect either I'm not doing my job well enough to make Trump uncomfortable with me, or it might make me think he thinks I'm susceptible to this kind, to flattery, or not outright bribery, but the kind of, familiarity, or the kind of bribery that familiarity might facilitate. You'll give me better coverage if I treat you to a free dinner at Mar-a-Lago or something like that. That would panic me. Not panic, but it would worry me a little bit. I'd wonder about why am I, I think I've done something wrong, or that I'm being singled out for some kind of weird monitoring, I guess. Does anybody feel like when they went, like, at any point, did they flash a thing in your eyes and tell you to forget what happened there, or did they implant a chip in you or anything like that? I would check myself. I'd do two things after meeting Donald Trump. I'd check myself for tics as one, and I'd check myself for chips that have been implanted underneath my skin that might help him track me. And I'm not just being paranoid, I'm being super paranoid about this guy because he's nuts. Anyway, what other sort of things make me think that he is super nuts? Well, I'll tell you. One story forwarded to me by several folks who thought it might make sense to include in the show. A Politico report, and Politico, I guess, is Mike Allen at Politico anymore, or was he? I don't even remember. These guys, I don't track this stuff. Armando knows off the top of his head where everybody writes. Greg knows where everybody writes. I do not. But this story in Politico raised some eyebrows, more than a few, on separate people, because typically people have no more than two, and some only have one. And then there are some that have none, like Dick Gephardt. But anyway, that's not who we're here to talk about. Trump private security force playing with fire is the headline of the piece I'm thinking of. Kenneth Vogel, the writer. The president-elect continues to employ a battalion of retired cops and FBI agents, wink, wink, hint, hint, to protect him and clamp down on protesters. This is problematic, and one of the many areas where having an extraordinarily wealthy, or I'm always hesitant to say that Donald Trump is an extraordinarily wealthy guy. He's certainly got command of the resources that you might associate with somebody who's actually rich, though I suspect a lot of it is parlor tricks. But for shorthand, we'll say he's a rich guy. It has always been an option, and candidates have very frequently hired their own private security, the article notes, but usually only up until the point at which they become eligible for Secret Service protection, which is free to them. They don't have to pay for that, and that's usually a huge relief and good sign that they can shed that expense. But Donald Trump continued to bear that expense, and he kept his own private security even throughout the campaign when he was protected by Secret Service. And the article also notes Secret Service protection levels increased dramatically. If you win, then you just get an even bigger detail. And he actually ended up spending, I think they said, more money on his own private security even after that happened, although I may have misread that. It may have been he increased his spending after he qualified for Secret Service or after he was granted Secret Service protection during the campaign. Let's take a look at the article and let Ken Vogel identify the problems for us as he sees them. This is Dateline Grand Rapids, Michigan. President-elect Donald Trump has continued employing a private security and intelligence team at his victory rallies, and he is expected to keep at least some members of the team after he becomes president, according to people familiar with the plans. I'll pause here for a second just to make some observations up top. One, it's already sort of problematic. I mean, you can't avoid the problem of having the president travel with a Secret Service detail, but it's already problematic in that Secret Service has to sort of balance their role as protectors and also, by the way, their role as law enforcement officers, ostensibly under the command through some chain or another of the president himself, but also have to worry about protecting a constitutional officer who, under normal circumstances, with a normal person, will be sensitive to the constitutional restrictions that would, let's say, prevent a willful dictator, let's say, from simply rounding up all possible protesters ahead of time and putting them all in prison. Although we've come kind of close to that in the past, and the Secret Service is a little more proactive than you might want in some cases for some presidents when it comes to classifying protest itself as something closer to a physical threat and, enabling the president to live in a bubble. This incoming president, Trump, perhaps has a thicker membrane on his bubble than most and a more robust imaginary life inside that bubble than most. And this can only make more trouble. But already the Secret Service has to balance, do we allow, constitutionally speaking, how much protest do we have to allow, and how do we balance that with our protective mission? And it's usually resolved in favor, if they have to err on one side or another, they end up erring on the side of more protection. It's usually their option. But at least they are federal employees and federal officers and answerable to federal standards on constitutional rights. It takes a while, and it's less than satisfactory, and you don't get to vindicate your rights on the spot in most cases, unless you're white and have an AR-15. You have to go to court and resolve them after the fact, and that's considerably less than satisfactory in most cases. But add on top of this that you're going to have private security actors who are subject differently, let's say, to constitutional strictures, right? They don't have necessarily the same responsibilities as federal employees, or they don't have, they certainly haven't spent as much time developing the guidelines. And a lot of constitutional protections, as we've pointed out in different contexts in the past, were established as against federal government or state government actors. It's a different thing to say the state violated my right to free speech than it is to say these private folks violated my right to free speech. Your free speech rights are as against the government, not as against other private actors. There are certain, bedrock restrictions. They're not allowed to assault you, but that's just plain old assault law. But mixing the missions is going to create a lot of problems. And mixing the missions is already a problem for the Secret Service, but they have protocols, at least, even if it takes forever to enforce them and you rarely succeed against their own internal review process, much less in court. But at least they exist. Secret, private security likely won't even have that to fall back on and won't have trained in any way, likely, with an eye at all, at any point given to respecting constitutional rights. It's just not in their purview. They don't understand or care about it, and they're not answerable for it, and they never have been. They might have to be all of a sudden, but we won't know until they do something horribly wrong and everybody ends up in court. Anyway, it's never been an issue before for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it costs an awful lot of money to protect yourself that way, and Secret Service is being offered to you for free, plus they know what they're doing, so people tend to hand things over to them. This is new and different because we have a president who is in a position to say, to hell with it, I'll continue to spend X dollars, whether out of my own pocket or out of the pockets of my business, or God only knows how he's paying for these things. But he can authorize their continuance, and he's not automatically relieved of the burden of determining where the right balance lies as between constitutional rights and protection. He hasn't got professionals, or he has decided not to hand it entirely over to the professionals. He instead wants to keep his own team on. And we've never had that because no one can afford to do that. And it was never necessary. I mean, it's not necessary now. I just mean security issues being what they are today. We've had extraordinarily wealthy presidents before, but not like this, and not in an era where personal protection rose to the levels that it's at today. Okay. John Wunderlich right now asking the right questions about it. Is Trump's security team going to be paid through a government contract? Or is this a private arrangement that contradicts Secret Service roles? It's a good question. I'll retweet it for everybody to take a look at. My guess for you is that it ought to be paid for privately by Trump out of his pocket and therefore would conflict with Secret Service roles. And instead, he will pay for it out of a government contract instead. He'll simply let his apparatus know that he wants to put out a bid. At some point, he'll put it out for bids, and the guys who have the contract now will magically win that bid. It might even be a no-bid contract, and he'll start paying them out of the Treasury instead. I'm telling you, that's my prediction. Okay, so what did Ken Vogel put together for us? So we have the basics here. The arrangement represents a major break from tradition. All modern presidents and presidents-elect have entrusted their personal security entirely to the Secret Service and their event security mostly to local law enforcement, rallies and such, according to presidential security experts and Secret Service sources. But Trump, who puts a premium on loyalty and has demonstrated great interest in having forceful security at his events, has opted to maintain an aggressive and unprecedented private security force led by Keith Schiller, a retired New York City cop and Navy veteran who started working for Trump in 1999 as a part-time bodyguard, eventually rising to become his head of security. Usually worried about weirdos like that. But, let's see. Security officials warn that employing private security personnel heightens risks for the president-elect and his team, as well as for protesters, dozens of whom have alleged racial profiling, undue force, or aggression at the hands of Trump's security, with at least 10 joining a trio of lawsuits now pending against Trump, his campaign, or its security. And another of the problems for protesters or others, even if you're not there as a protester, is it becomes very difficult. It's clouded. You don't know who's kicking you out. And it should be very obvious, and you should be, you might expect to be treated differently by local police officers, the Secret Service, or just security goons hired by Donald Trump. If they're just essentially big guys who like to kick people's butts that are hired by Donald Trump with, an eye toward saying, yeah, you're not going to be subject to the same restrictions as official law enforcement, that's very troubling. And they may very well, when they kick you out, imply to you or do things that would to you imply that they are either local law enforcement or Secret Service, when in fact they're not. So they'll be acting under color of law probably all the time. What do they have to say about it in this article? Well, here's where the headline comes from. It's playing with fire, said Jonathan Wackrow, a former Secret Service agent who worked on President Barack Obama's protective detail during his 2012 re-election campaign. Having a private security team working events with Secret Service increases the service's liability. It creates greater confusion and it creates greater risk, Wackrow said. You never want to commingle a police function with a private security function, he said, adding, if you talk to the guys on the detail and the guys who are running the rallies, that's been a little bit difficult because it's so abnormal. Wackrow, who left the service in 2014 and is now executive director of a security company called RANE, R-A-N-E, short for Risk Assistance Network and Exchange, by the way, said if he were the lead agent at a Trump rally, I wouldn't allow it. But I don't even know. I mean, that's a thing that you like to say, but I don't know whether it's even a matter of I wouldn't allow it. I don't know that Donald Trump reacts very well to I won't allow it. Well, who are you? You won't allow it. I'll allow it. How about this? I allow you to be fired. I don't know. I don't think you can fire necessarily the lead agent assigned to you, but you can certainly suggest that they be reassigned. I don't know. Anyway, Wackrow suggested it's a tricky situation for the Secret Service. What are they going to do? Pick a fight with the president-elect and his advisors? That's not a way to start a romance or any other kind of relationship, for that matter. I might not have picked that word. Several past presidential nominees have used private security, or in the case of governors running for president, state police details, but the experts could not think of another example of a president-elect continuing with any private security after Election Day when Secret Service protection expands dramatically for the winner. In fact, most candidates drop any outside security the moment they're granted Secret Service protection. That is, when they become the nominees of their party, most likely. Trump's spending on private security, on the other hand, has actually increased after he was granted Secret Service protection in November of 2015. Through the end of last month, Trump's campaign had spent more than $1 million on private security contracting, compared to $360,000 spent by the campaign of his vanquished Democratic rival Hillary Clinton, according to FEC reports. That's despite the fact that every other aspect of her campaign operation dwarfed his. Overall, her campaign outspent his by nearly 75% overall, whereas Clinton's security spending, like that of most other presidential campaigns, went mostly to protection for her offices and payments to local law enforcement or security companies for ad hoc security at events. Trump's campaign took it to a whole different level. It built a robust private security force that traveled the country, supplementing the protective personal security supplied by the Secret Service and working to identify and remove possible protesters, or just people Trump and his allies had a bad feeling about from his events. And that's where things begin to get weird. The private security team has been present at each of the 7 rallies on Trump's post-election thank you tour and has removed protesters, sometimes roughly, at many stops. That included about a dozen protesters during a rally here, Grand Rapids, on December 9th in a minor league arena called the Deltaplex, where Trump mostly shrugged off the interruptions until he became impatient with a particularly disruptive protester. "Get him out," the president-elect instructed his private security. That appeared to spur Trump's security director, Schiller, to venture away from the stage where he had arrived with Trump and wade deep into the crowd to assist other private security personnel with the removal. Before the end of the rally, Schiller returned to his place by Trump's side, along with a Secret Service contingent of which he is often misidentified as a member. Again, a big problem. Despite being, at 58 years old, significantly older than most agents, Schiller looks the part, invariably sporting a uniform of dark suits and white shirts, along with a Secret Service-issued perimeter pin, and maintaining an athletic 6'4", 210-pound frame. Thanks for pointing that out. Together, the entourage accompanied Trump back to the airport, onto his plane, and back to New York. It was the same routine as Schiller and Trump repeated countless times during the campaign, and it likely will repeat it countless more times over the coming years. Since Schiller is expected to follow Trump into the White House, according to multiple sources on the transition team, in interviews with about a dozen people who interact with Trump, they said even as the president-elect's Secret Service detail has expanded significantly since the election, he remains most comfortable with Schiller and his team. A native of New Paltz, New York, and father of two, Schiller has been director of security for the Trump Organization since 2004. The Trump associates say Schiller is expected to become a personal White House aide who would serve as the incoming president's full-time physical gatekeeper, though he might not be able to offer his boss the wide range of services he has in the past. For instance, federal law prohibits anyone other than law enforcement officers from bringing firearms into federal buildings, and there are even stricter rules about who can carry on White House grounds or around Secret Service protectees. Schiller has been armed at times early in the campaign, but it's unclear if he continued carrying a firearm after Trump was granted Secret Service protection in November 2015. Even after the arrival of Trump's service detail, which typically marks the end of any pre-existing security arrangement, Schiller never strayed from his boss's side. The associates say Schiller provides more than just security. Wow. Oh, I'm just kidding. Trump has been known to ask Schiller's opinion on all manner of subjects. When people want to reach Trump, they often call Schiller's cell phone, and he decides who gets through to the boss. These guys are a little weird. Photos often show Schiller looming over Trump's shoulder as he works crowds, standing sentry by the stage as Trump speaks, or ejecting protesters from rallies. He's developed a small but avid fan base on Twitter, where Trump supporters cheer Schiller's confrontations with protesters, pose for selfies with him at events and backstage, and praise him as a brave American eagle who kept Trump safe and sound. And Schiller, a registered Republican, showed signs of reveling in Trump's campaign, gee whiz, creating his own Twitter account just before the first primaries to promote the campaign and chronicle his unique perspective from the trail. He occasionally channeled his boss's attacks on rivals like Ted Cruz. "Wow, Lion Ted is becoming unhinged. So sad," he tweeted, believe it or not, as Trump was clinching the GOP nomination over the Texas senator. And he spread false claims about Democrats, including the 20% of Clinton's campaign cash, that 20% of her campaign cash came from people who were responsible for the September 2011 terrorist attacks, and that a grand jury had been convened to investigate her use of private email servers for State Department business, and that Obama encouraged undocumented immigrants to vote illegally. So, good, right? Yet Schiller mostly remains, as one former campaign aide put it, the most important man no one has ever heard of. That influence comes from Schiller's ability to essentially control access to Trump, acting as his liaison to everyone from staff and well-wishers to dignitaries and even Secret Service agents. "Keith is a kind of consigliere," said a transition team official. "He knows all the players, all the properties. He has the confidence of Trump and of the family. To describe him as a body guy would be very, very beneath the role that he actually plays." A younger aide, possibly the campaign's trip director, John McEntee, likely will be tapped for the traditional body man valet-like role, while Schiller would fill a new type of hybrid staff/security role, the official explained. Keith knows Trump inside and out. He knows when he turns right and when it turns left, the official said. Not sure what that's supposed to mean. Yet, Schiller's tight relationship with and protectiveness of his boss has already complicated the Secret Service's rigid protection protocols, say allies of the service and independent security experts. In March, when a 32-year-old man jumped a barricade and rushed toward the stage as Trump was speaking at a rally in Dayton, Ohio, Secret Service agents immediately descended on Trump from the opposite sides of the dais, encircling him in a human shield as a handful of other agents tackled the man before he could leap onto the stage. About a second after the first two agents reached Trump, Schiller leapt onto the stage and moved to position himself between the scrum and his boss. The response appeared tightly choreographed to the untrained eye, a phalanx of men in dark suits and close-cropped hair swarming to protect their charge. But in law enforcement circles, Schiller's reaction was panned as too slow and was the subject of disapproving conversation among agents, according to a law enforcement source briefed on the conversations. The source said one agent described Schiller as the JV trying to keep up in a varsity game. Well, that might have been what it looked like, I guess, to their specialized eye. I didn't see it, so I can't offer any critique of that. But I will say, well, what did they say his age was? 50-something? I'm not surprised that it's a little slower. I don't know if JV would necessarily be the word choice, but you could chalk it up to something else, not being junior varsity, but being older. I think that would be a fair assessment. All right. Let's see. Justice commenting here. Smart Justice probably doing this on Twitter rather than behind the scenes on Skype. Any FBI agents from that rogue New York office implicated in election sabotage a part of Trump's Praetorian Guard? Good question. That's what raised my eyebrows the moment we saw up at the top of the article that they were ex-FBI agents. I wouldn't be surprised with that at all. Especially, Trump's base being in New York City. Okay, onward with the article here. Let's see if there's any other interesting and discoverable bits in here. Specifically, the source said that Schiller came from a position on the dais that the agents would have used to evacuate Trump if that had been necessary. If that happens, they would have run right into Keith, and he was about 3 seconds too late, the source said. Okay, probably true. Joe Funk, a former Secret Service agent who worked several presidential campaigns, said agents throughout their careers are trained nonstop to react to different situations based on your position and distance from the protectee in what they call AOP, or assaults on the principal. That includes intensive drilling as a detail before being deployed to protect the presidential candidate or president, to familiarize yourself with the people who you are going to be working with. Stressing that he wasn't assessing the response to the Dayton incident, Funk said, without any slight to Keith or to any of the guys on his team, they just haven't had the opportunity to go through the Secret Service training that would allow them to respond to a situation like a Secret Service agent would. And that's likely true. And that's probably remediable as well at taxpayer expense. They'll probably train Trump's personal security forces, which will probably remain around him, they'll probably just, force the Secret Service to train them that way, which might be a good thing. It's, if they're going to be around, they should at least know what the protocols are so they don't get in the way of any of them. But the ancillary benefit, of course, is that when Trump finally does leave the White House, he takes the Secret Service with him, essentially. And, of course, he does get remaining Secret Service protection. It's just at a diminished level. But if his private security force has all been trained for free by the Secret Service over the years, well, so much the better for him. In addition to which, he's, I'm sure, looking for upgrades to the electronics in his private jets as well. Don't know if he's going to succeed in getting that one done. Since retiring from the Secret Service in 2005, Joe Funk, again, has provided private security for presidential candidates, including Obama in the early stages of the 2008 campaign and Mitt Romney in 2012. In both of those cases, he said that when the Secret Service took over, he almost immediately stepped aside. My assignment was over. That was it. So Funk said that he was very surprised while providing security for Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign to witness firsthand Trump's composite detail, including the service and private security at multi-candidate events during the primary. I was under the impression that at some point this would be weeded out, or that the private security would revert to more of a traditional staff role, said Funk, who is senior vice president at a private security firm called Torchstone Global. As for why that appears not to have occurred, Funk said there may be a very good reason for it, but as a layperson on the outside looking in, I'm just kind of scratching my head. In my experience, this is unprecedented. Agents and their associates told Politico that Schiller and his team initially bristled at the Secret Service's move to take the lead, and that the continued presence of the private security brigade at events has caused tension and in some cases gotten in the way of the service's protocols. During the campaign, Schiller and his team could be seen at rallies appearing to direct Secret Service agents, local police, and employees of security companies hired for specific events. And that's sort of dangerous all by itself, even though I guess we didn't get any specifics about it and didn't hear any complaints. But the idea that, his security guy gets to direct federal law enforcement officers as though he had the authority to, order them into battle, essentially, that's sort of at odds with what we traditionally think of as going on around presidents. And again, it's something that Trump's wealth has made an issue. It's something that his wealth has made possible. It ordinarily would never come to this. Secret Service spokeswoman, Nicole Maynor. Oh, I think I've missed a part here, and it has to do with Hope Hicks, so we got to throw it in there. Trump spokeswoman Hope Hicks declined to respond to a series of questions. How does she do it? About private security officials, who's paying them, their relationship with the Secret Service, whether they're armed, and what their roles will be after inauguration. Instead, she said in a statement, Trump rallies are incredibly safe events and are executed with support from the U.S. Secret Service, local law enforcement, and private security to ensure the safety and enjoyment of all guests in attendance. For further details, please reach out to the U.S. Secret Service, because they're so open about that. It's only the Secret Service. Anyway, the Secret Service spokeswoman, Nicole Maynor, issued a statement saying the Secret Service does not provide information regarding our protective operations and referring to a section of the U.S. Code that outlines the agency's obligations to protect the president-elect. As for the agency's relationship with Trump's security personnel and whether the service has asked Trump to dial back his security or whether the security carries firearms, Maynor responded only, the individuals you are referring to are staff personnel, and not her staff. Schiller did not respond to requests for comment. In a little noticed video interview recorded in Trump Tower less than 2 months after then-candidate Trump was granted Secret Service protection, Schiller said his team had a great working relationship with the Secret Service. They bring their own set of assets, which is, right now, we can use everything we can get as far as the way the world is right now. He's a very worried guy. And the campaign in itself. It's inherently a risky business every day, Schiller said in the interview, which was posted in January of this year, even though it doesn't say anything. But he also noticed that he had received some dignitary protection training, received some dignitary protection training through the Secret Service when he was on the New York City police force, and he touted the capacity of private security team he oversees. We have the best assets money can buy, I can assure you of that, as far as protecting him, his family, and his property, Schiller told the interviewer, Rich Siegel, one of his childhood buddies from New Paltz. How nice. Schiller explained that he has more than a dozen people working for him, while he said that I'm no stranger to putting my hands on people, thanks to his days in the New York City Police Department's narcotics unit. He added, things are different right now. I hire big guys who do all the fighting. The identities and numbers of the employees who constitute Trump's private security operation, as well as other details, are not entirely clear, and they never will be because they're private. That's partly, at least, because some of the costs, including Schiller's salary at one point in the campaign, appeared to be split between the Trump Organization corporate structure and Trump's presidential campaign, which is probably a no-no, but no one will ever call him on it. And also because the campaign paid many of its security officials, including several who continued working for Trump after the election, through opaque corporate structures. Again, another whole entire set of really questionable conflicts of interest. But who cares? Because there's bigger ones. He's flooding the zone with them every day. Schiller himself was paid $181,000 for campaign work from July 2015 through mid-November, according to FEC filings, with some of it coming in the form of in-kind payments, likely indicating money paid to Schiller by the Trump Organization and possibly reimbursed by Trump personally. The campaign also paid $50,000 for, quote, security services during the second half of the year to a company called KS Global Group LLC. Now guess what KS in KS Global Group LLC stands for. Let's see. Any hands up there? Yes, you, Keith Schiller. What do you think KS Keith Schiller. Well, interesting. Well, the company, which was registered anonymously in Delaware, because nobody will figure out who KS is, in 2015, October 2015. While it bears Schiller's initials, neither he nor the Trump transition team would comment on who is behind it. Boing. It's a big mystery. Woo. Another company, Black Tie Protection Services, which a Trump campaign operative said is linked to Schiller's team. Maybe a childhood buddy from New Paltz? I don't know. Was paid more than $106,000 in the final 4 months of the campaign, and the campaign paid $28,000 for security services to a company called ASIT, A-S-I-T, ASIT Consulting, owned by a 62-year-old former FBI agent named Don Albrecht, A-L-B-R-A-C-H-T, for those of you who feel like Googling, who has been known to film and occasionally taunt protesters. Interesting. So what we're saying here, of course, is that the campaign paid security personnel to come in, film, and taunt protesters as part of his security operation. But because one LLC hired another LLC that hired another LLC that hired, I'm sure it's all just fine. It's just actually too confusing for people to figure out. And so, again, just another of the conflicts of interest we'll never get to the bottom of. It's just too far down the list to care about. But by far, the biggest recipient of Trump security cash is a company called Xmark LLC, which boasts on its website that its employees have expertise in surveillance, close quarter battle, that they love to, give cool sounding names to their training, some of which is legit and some of which is not, probably in most cases, but I find this all the time with gun training places and security training places. They love the terminology. So what does Xmark have to offer on its website? Surveillance, close quarter battle, and tactical shooting skills, and also that the firm provided all PPD, personal protection detail, for Mr. Trump's campaign travel, to include all advance work in coordination with local law enforcement agencies in support throughout the country until being relieved by the United States Secret Service in mid-November 2015. Okay, so they got chucked when the Secret Service came in. Yet the company continued receiving payments from Trump's campaign after that point, with $89,000 coming after Election Day. Its officials, including President Eddie Deck and Vice President Gary Uher, I'm guessing, U-H-E-R, both of whom are, ding ding, Justice, you doing the Googling on this? Retired FBI agents, Eddie Deck and Gary Uher, U-H-E-R, were seen policing the crowds at Trump rallies throughout the campaign, as well as the post-election thank you tour. The pair, combined with Xmark and a retired New York City cop named Michael Sharkey, spelled like it sounds, K-E-Y, who also is associated with the company, has been paid nearly $579,000 and counting by the campaign. Trump transition team sources say the thank you rallies are being funded by Trump's campaign committee, but that Trump, as president, might headline rallies funded and organized by a still-in-the-works outside group that will be able to accept huge donations unbound by federal campaign limits. We'll perhaps talk a little bit about that as well. While Trump's Saturday rally in Mobile, Alabama was the last one scheduled on the thank you tour, he hinted to the crowd that he indeed intended to resume the rallies as president. This is the last time I'll be speaking at a rally for maybe a while. You know, they're saying as president, he shouldn't be doing rallies, but I think we should, right? He said prompting loud applause. We've done everything else the opposite. Well, no, this is the way you get an honest word out because you can't give it to the press because they're so dishonest. I'm going to go have dinner with them. If Trump's team continues funding the rallies using private money, they would have the right to decide who can attend their events, including which opinions or speech they deem acceptable by attendees, said Lee Rowland, a senior staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm not 100% sure that I agree with him, but he's coming from the right perspective. I would think if he thought he could get away with claiming otherwise, he would. But he doesn't. I don't know. I don't know that you can separate the public and private functions of the president in the context of a campaign-style rally with Secret Service protection quite that neatly. But I don't know. If Lee Rowland doesn't think it can be done or doesn't think it can be challenged, and he's working for the ACLU, I don't know who's going to do it. I guess I should say, because the next paragraph reminds me that she, Lee Rowland, co-wrote a post in March on the ACLU's website bemoaning that the removal of protesters of color from this year's presidential campaign rallies is certainly not what we want our democracy to look like. Nonetheless, Rowland told Politico that as long as Trump's campaign or an outside group organizes and sets the rules for a private event, and a politician, including the president, is an invited guest, then the host can decide whether and when to revoke attendees' invitations. That would make them trespassers and allow them to be legally removed. And I guess we're used to that in the context of closed door, even if they're big, huge dinners, fundraisers, right? But not used to it yet in the context of rallies. But I mean, I guess the principle is pretty much the same. So it'll be difficult to differentiate between them. I mean, it can't be the venue that makes the difference, or even really the style of the event, because I mean, there's as much cheerleading going on at a fundraising dinner, I guess, as there is a rally. Although it's difficult to compare the two because nobody else has done them as rally. I don't know. It's going to be very confusing, and they're counting on that confusion. So we shouldn't be surprised. Anyway. If the rallies were funded or organized by the government, on the other hand, and there's always some because the Secret Service is always going to be there, but then only law enforcement could identify protesters for ejection and actually remove them, and only then for breaking the law, she said. Does everybody get that distinction? I mean, that's the way things are supposed to go. The way Trump works things is going to make it confusing, but if it's a private event organized by a private organization and private dollars that invites the president, they can direct their own private security to determine who's a trespasser and have them removed. But if they're funded and organized by the government, and I guess everything's going to be a hybrid, and so it'll be a question of will the test be, is it more than 50% paid for that way? And how will you even determine that, especially does the salaries of his personal guys who he has transferred to federal government payroll to save money out of his pocket, does that add to the total? And so do they have to pay more than 50% of the money? I don't know how they'll determine these things. We'll find out in court eventually when someone sues. So that's the deal. If a private event to which they invite the president, and by the way, here's a great thing to keep in mind here. I know we haven't called her name in a while. Carly Fiorina, remember how she used to organize a lot of her events when she was still running for president, where she would be claiming it's not my campaign. I can't recall exactly why she was doing it this way, but it gave her some legal advantage, and maybe it was about dealing with protesters. I'm not even sure. Dealing with the press, or no, maybe it was who paid for these things. But she used to claim Right. I guess she was having independent expenditure people do it, right? She hadn't raised enough money for the campaign to hold her own rallies, so she was instead claiming that outside groups had arranged rallies and invited her. And she was just an invited guest, and she was going, I don't know, that's interesting. It's well worth contemplating in this context. Now, his leverage to do the same would be, I think, pretty pronounced. I mean, the president tells you he wants you to arrange an event and invite him to it, you do it. And if that's all it takes to change the nature of the law that will be enforced with respect to First Amendment rights at such an event is to have it organized ostensibly by some outside group, surely there's supposed to be no coordination about it. But I mean, the president literally can't go anywhere without coordination with his staff, including, if you include the Secret Service and all of that. He can't be a private guest without, but that happens now, with other presidents. So it's going to be very cloudy and gray area, to be sure, and we'll all throw up our hands in confusion. I can assure you this, though, his expanded security staff will be paid with someone else's dollars. I'm pretty certain about that, and they'll probably be yours. Anyway, that will present a significant problem. Anyway, so that's the difference. Private event, you can throw out anybody for any reason, as long as you declare them trespassers. An event paid for or chiefly organized by the government, only law enforcement can identify protesters for ejection and actually remove them, and only then for actually breaking a law. So he'll be avoiding those sorts of situations. He'll have things that are supposed to look like official government functions going on, or he'll call them that, but they won't be that, so he can give himself considerably more flexibility for clearing out the undesirables. Trump's private security team, to return to our article here, has taken full advantage of that latitude, and Deck, who appears to be the leader of the rally security unit, I've lost track of who Deck is and all this, he has served as the point of the spear. Who's Deck? I want to see if I can scroll back. Eddie Deck, that's right, who is president of, which company is that one? The company, scrolling back. Is that Xmark? Anyway, he's the one who's teamed up with Gary Ewer. You remember him. Okay, so Deck appears to be the head of Rally Security Unit. Deck, a buff 62-year-old who at various times took to wearing street clothes to blend into rally crowds so he could sleuth out protesters. I wonder what kind of street clothes that was supposed to be. Tank tops that say no fat chicks, I guess. Has drawn repeated complaints about excessive force. Yay. That's not a problem in this country. And ejecting people solely because they don't look like Trump supporters. That's the way it's going to be next couple of years, guys. At an April rally in Harrington, Delaware, Deck was captured on video calling for assistance from Delaware state troopers to remove two young African Americans separately. When one, Anwar Dyer, protested, "I didn't say anything," Deck responded, "I don't care. You're leaving. You're leaving. And if you don't leave, you're going to get hooked up. And I know you don't want to get hooked up." I guess that means something different. A college student, who would ordinarily have a different view of what getting hooked up means, who attended a Trump rally in Tucson in March, told Politico that Deck grabbed my arm and angrily pulled me through the crowd, asserting that, quote, "I genuinely believed I was kicked out because I am transgender," unquote. Oh, I'm sure. At an August rally in Charlotte, Deck removed an 18-year-old Indian-American Trump supporter named Jake Anantha, who Deck accused of having protested at past Trump rallies. Anantha, a registered Republican who was wearing a Trump shirt, later complained to the Charlotte Observer, "Why are all these white people allowed to attend and I'm not?" Messages left for Albrecht at Xmark email and phone numbers were not returned, and it was not clear whether they would continue working with Trump's security team in any rallies he might do as president. Henry Brousseau, Broussesseau, Henry Brousseau, who alleges that he was punched in the stomach by Trump supporters after shouting Black Lives Matter at a March rally in Charlotte, said Trump security did not seem to be interested at all in public safety. They were there to keep the rally on message. They were being speech police. Brousseau, who was a high school senior at the time, and 2 fellow protesters were ejected. They're now suing Trump and his campaign, as well as the convention center, for failing to provide adequate security, while also claiming that Trump's calls to get him out were calculated to incite violence against the plaintiffs. Brousseau said it's a pattern of silencing his opponents, which is an unpresidential, undemocratic, and un-American, thing. Oh, God, this is just, it ends there. But it is unpresidential, undemocratic, and un-American, period. Another lawsuit was filed 3 weeks before the election, in part by an African-American man who alleges he was punched, kicked, and called racial slurs by Trump supporters at a November 2015 Trump rally in Birmingham, even after security arrived on the scene, all while Trump yelled, "Get him the hell out of here." It calls on the Trump campaign, the convention center, and the city of Birmingham to pay for damages, institute new procedures for security, and issue a public apology to those who attended the rally in question and to the residents of Birmingham. Good luck with that. A third lawsuit alleges that Schiller, Deck, Ewer, and 2 other Trump security officers assaulted a handful of protesters during a raucous protest outside the campaign's Manhattan headquarters in September. In an affidavit in the case, Schiller acknowledged that he struck one of the protesters in the head, but he says that was because he felt the protester physically grabbed me from behind and also felt that person's hand on my firearm, which I guess tells us that it was there, although that's back in when? November 2000? No, I'm not sure when that one was. September. There we are. But is that this September? Firearm. I guess that answers things. Which was strapped on the right side of my rib cage in a body holster. That's probably not wise. I assume he's moved it since then, but I guess if you run into Schiller, that's where his gun is. Based on my years of training, I instinctively reacted by turning around in one movement and striking the person with my open hand. I guess that's his other move, so watch for that. The protester's lawyer deposed Schiller, Deck, and Ewer in the days leading up to the Grand Rapids rally. The judge in June ruled that Trump would not have to provide a deposition in the case, despite the assertion by the protesters' lawyers that Trump has had a substantial role in bringing about violence on the part of his security guards, unquote. So, interesting way to occupy a large block of today's show, but there are many related stories revolving around it. Not the least of which is another Politico piece here, and I guess this is one that they linked to, and that I mentioned when Greg was on. Trump advisors spar over new nonprofit group. I think I was actually talking about Reince Priebus flexing his muscle inside of Trump Tower, and it may be related to this. I don't think this is what I was clicking on, but maybe. Who knows? But you'll recall that there was some dispute about what form Trump's post-election nonprofit agenda arm might take. And again, there is precedent for this. We've seen it in the past, and both from candidates who have won and candidates who have lost, but most recently Obama for America transitioning into Organizing for America. So it's not unprecedented, as people were paying maybe slightly too much attention to in the way of typos over the weekend from our tweeter-in-chief. But this piece by Shane Goldmacher, Trump advisors spar over new nonprofit group. I guess we'll skim through this because there's not a whole lot of time left for this bit. But rivaling factions jockey over who should head the group central to Trump's political agenda. Interesting, just watching people fight over, seats at the table and staying close to Trump. And with such an unpredictable guy and being so flighty, I guess that's just good personal politics. Make sure you stay close. Donald Trump's top advisors are jousting, it says, over control of the new political group they are forming to help press the president-elect's agenda, as rival camps have formed with repercussions for who ends up as senior staff in the White House. The issue came to a head last Wednesday in a glass-walled conference room in the 14th floor of Trump Tower, where about a dozen members of Trump's inner circle gathered to plot the future of the still unformed nonprofit. At the head of the table sat Brad Parscale, you remember him, Trump's digital director, and Kellyanne Conway, his campaign manager, with top aides scattered all around, among them Trump's longtime attorney Michael Cohen. Says who? And there's no such thing as spousal rape. That guy, still in the game. Trump's deputy campaign manager, David Bossie. We all remember his background. Senior Trump communications advisor, Jason Miller. Vice President-elect Mike Pence's senior advisor, Mark Short. And Rebecca Mercer, the most influential donor in Trump's orbit. That group met in a room. That met in that room is going to be the nucleus, one senior Trump advisor said. You all remember Rebecca Mercer. She and her dad were the mega donors who not only backed the final stages of Trump's campaign. They originally started out supporting somebody else. They switched teams when things became, when the writing was on the wall. But she also, behind the financial backing behind Steve Bannon's other side projects where he actually drew his salary from, right, during the campaign, including the marketing of the Clinton Cash book and movie, et cetera, et cetera. You do remember that, right? She also, I guess one of the co-hosts of the recent idiotic masquerade ball during the Halloween season, I guess, where they all went out to their mansion on the end of Long Island, the heroes and villains one, you remember? Okay, that was their house. Anyway, but while everyone present agreed the nonprofit organization would be vital to enact the president-elect's political agenda, they disagreed on who exactly would control it. They are all control freaks, of course. According to interviews with half a dozen Trump advisors and transition officials, most of whom spoke anonymously to describe the internal dynamics. Parscale is the only senior Trump aide who is definitely headed to the nonprofit, and 4 people familiar with the discussions about the group said that Parscale had been specifically empowered by Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and one of his closest counselors, to take charge of the new organization. At one point in Wednesday's meeting, Parscale jumped in to say that no disrespect to the Mercers, as Rebecca sat only a few feet away, but that this group was about Trump and his movement, not them. Some took that as a slap at her efforts to raise big money for Trump. That got people's attention, said a second person with knowledge of the meeting. The jousting was someone in the meeting trying to elevate themselves above the rest. Well, you know how those things go, and there's no time, anyway, to dig through the rest of this particular article on it, but it might be something you want to digest offline just to see where the fault lines are forming in the inner circle. But definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. Speaking of nonprofits, though, I did want to address something else. Those of you who've listened to the show or who follow my Twitter feed have seen me pondering the possibility that Donald Trump and his family might seek to, let's say, pocket, as it would be the easy term, privatize, in some way convert large chunks of the money being raised by the Presidential Inaugural Committee to personal use. My speculation being that they might actually demand appearance fees at his own inauguration. Total speculation, no doubt about it, but I think there's a lot of room for it. And but I want to limit or amend some of the things that I had to say about it originally. It is still true. Still the case. The FEC does not have a form for listing or disclosing the disbursements made by a presidential inaugural committee. That's just true. They have a form called FEC Form 13 where you have to disclose the donations coming in. That's to be expected. But normal FEC reports both have you declare whose money is coming in and where the money is going out. Who's getting paid by the campaign to do what? And it's very vague. And, if you really want to hide something, you just say consulting services or other services or whatever. And it's left to the press to try to dig up what kind of services were those things. Are they hookers? I don't know. Are they pollsters? Maybe both. I have no idea. But there's not even a requirement to say where you spend your inauguration committee money. That's very weird, but it's the sort of thing that I'm sure they've never really felt like they had to have anybody report, because they've never had anybody who had the gall to do something like, yeah, I should have an appearance fee. That would be, I mean, it's inventive, but no one else has ever tried to do that. And besides which, again, it's a big party for an incoming president. How nitpicky do you want to be? It's about excess on that person's behalf, and so fine, go for it. Well, so I want to point out that it's not the case that there's zero reporting whatsoever. And that's good. I mean, it felt weird that there really could be none, but it was pointed out over the weekend. Here's where the control, such as it is, exists. It's still minimal, but typically speaking, and I don't know that this is the case for this one because we don't have any paperwork on it, but presidential inaugural committees are typically organized as nonprofit organizations. 501c4, typically it's said, is the form that they take. And any 501c nonprofit organization, any 501 nonprofit organization. Are there nonprofit organizations outside of 501? There are non-C ones. There's 501H. I know that. Anyway, they all have to file, of course, 990 forms. Form 990 with the IRS. That does both. That both reports where their money is coming in from and where their money goes out to. But it's extraordinarily limited. It's even more limited than most of the FEC reports you're likely to see. And in fact, I took a look at some of the 990 forms, and they're very difficult to find online, by the way. I'm having a hell of a time finding prior presidential inaugural committees 990s for the year in which they did the bulk of their activity. But you have to list that sometimes I think they ask for the top 4 recipients of, the top 4 highest paid contractors, et cetera, et cetera. But there's not an itemized list of everybody who got money and why they got it. And in addition to which, you could simply say either the Trumps aren't among the top 4, or you could list them among the top 4, and you could simply say, management fees. You could just list it as an appearance fee. The thing about those disclosures is you won't see them until considerably after the inauguration. Even with the FEC reports, they have 90 days after the inauguration. 90 days until after he's inaugurated until you find out exactly who paid for the thing. But you won't find this until December or maybe even January of the following year filed with the IRS. And even then, it's going to be extraordinarily vague. So there is some reporting. There will be some way at some point of finding out whether he funneled any of that money to himself, though he may funnel it through one or another of his LLCs, of which he's the sole owner, and we'll have to figure that out later. But at least there'll be something of a paper trail to follow. So that's good. There'll be something, a fun thing, an activity for those of us watching on the show to do later on in the year. The fun never ends with the Trumps. That's good. The fun never ends here on Netroots Radio either, and more is to come right after I hang it up here. Metaphor Monday on the after show brings up the following stories. Attempting to balance the books on the backs of the poor, Michigan erroneously accused 93% of the claimants filing for unemployment insurance of committing fraud. White nationalists target Jews in a small Montana town. What do you hear about that one? And with the history of Pinochet and Pol Pot in his back pocket, Henry Kissinger discusses that Trump could offer the world an extraordinary opportunity, whatever that is.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David
Look at this
Walton.
last half. Are you ready? Though we're reporting that for the past 2 years, Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has partnered with a Putin ally oligarch and a former KGB official to run the troubled Bank of Cyprus. And 7-year-old Syrian war symbol Bana al-Abed, along with her mother, have been evacuated from Aleppo. Stay tuned for all that next.